from my perspective, I remember being in 8th grade when Columbine happened and being shocked. Now I'm never shocked anymore when I hear about school shootings. Do you think that gun violence is worse in the United States in general? Do you think it's just mass shootings are worse?
Yes, I think so, in a sense that how you look at it. The overall trends of violence and of shootings is less than it was, in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
But in the past decade, the frequency and the amount of people being killed at once has definitely increased.
Mm-hmm.
And you think back to when the assault weapon ban lapsed, when it was not renewed, and then those types of weapons became readily available, you've seen since that point that
Mm-hmm.
those particular weapons being used more often to kill more people at once. So, that's one of the things that people argue against. They're saying, well, historically, in the past 100 years, right now it's not as violent as it hasn't been in the past. And, that is true. But just kind of looking at the types of violence and the amount of people, that there are things that are higher and just should be not happening, are
Mm-hmm.
easily preventable if those types of people had not been able to get certain weapons.
Mm-hmm.
So 538 had a piece November 7th about mass shootings and saying that mass shooting deaths are up. So they weren't looking at
Mm-hmm.
overall numbers, but they were looking at numbers of deaths in mass shootings. And, so they look at a few different sources. Mother Jones magazine has been tracking this. There's a Stanford University project that has been tracking it called Mass Shootings in America. And then there's another, Politico had used another data source. So all three of those sources found that deaths from mass shootings were up. So they were measuring slightly different, they were defining mass shootings slightly differently. But they, in all three cases, found that they were up, especially since 2004, which is when the assault weapon ban lapsed. But the most shocking part of this entire piece to me, so it was only like a 2-page article, but it's the most shocking thing was that we don't really know why. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we know that it's up, uh, and we can look at how the different ways are to measure it, but we're not really sure our data is terribly accurate, and we don't really know why mass shootings are happening more now.
Hmm.
And this is sort of a common refrain in the literature that I was using to look at this. Sort of over and over, I kept reading, sort of depending on the question that you're looking at, that we just don't have very much information.
Mm-hmm.
That one of the big problems with studying gun violence is that people haven't been studying gun violence until fairly recently, in part because the CDC could not fund, there was no federal funding for studying it as a disease.
Yes. And that has been a thorn in our side and just of everyone who is in the gun violence prevention movement. That's the problem with the Dickey Amendment. That amendment was introduced into the funding that said no funding for CDC can lead to gun control. That was the actual phrase, can lead to gun control. And so that just put the damper on any sort of research related to gun violence. It was not, it's a hard subject to discuss because it's not like it specifically said you can't research this. It just said we're not going to fund it if
Mm-hmm.
it in any way will lead to gun control. So that's why in this past decade or so, we've definitely got away from that phrase. And we're saying we're not about gun control. We're about gun violence prevention.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, that's not what that amendment says anymore, does it? Of course not. We're not going to do gun control. We're doing gun violence prevention, which is a social disease, which is something that needs to be researched. So you need to fund this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that approach has helped. And there's been some movement based on research, but a lot of it has still been privately funded or it's at universities. And there is some research being conducted, but it definitely needs a huge amount of focus from the federal government, which it does not have right now.
And which it's not likely to have with this administration, I'd say.
Correct.
Yeah, although there is some positive movement even in even in this Senate, as terrible as the Senate is, for at least improving the background check system. Some even bipartisan, perhaps bipartisan support for improving background checks. So, maybe there's room even with the current administration.
It looks like that, and if you'd like me to talk about that specific bill, I'd be happy to share some details with you.
Yeah,
Sure.
that would be great.
So what you just referred to is there's a current bill called the Fix Nix Act, and that's supposed to be able to improve the background check system, to give incentives to the federal agencies and to states for improving the records that they're reporting to it. Because again, you do a background check, but what is in there, it it doesn't, that's what's most important. Okay, yes, if you've had a felony, or yes, if there's certain things, if you've been declared mentally incompetent within a court, an actual legal document that says that you can't own a gun. So there's certain things there that it's there's plenty of things that could be in there that aren't, that still, and that's how some people can slip through it. So of course we support improving the background check system, and we're glad that that particular act is going through and moving forward. The problem is right now, and this just happened this past week, is that the Republicans have taken another bill and they've packaged it with Fix Nix Act so that they're trying to pass them both at the same time. So we are strongly calling on everyone to take the action to call your representatives and call your senators and tell them to pass a clean Fix Nix Act, because they're trying to add concealed carry reciprocity to this as well, which is a very dangerous bill, and it's the number one priority for NRA.
Yeah, why don't we talk a little bit about concealed carry reciprocity? It's HR 38. I guess this, from what I'm understanding, it means that right now different states have different laws about who can get a concealed carry license. And so if you take your concealed weapon into another state, they don't have to, and they have different requirements for being licensed to carry a concealed weapon, then you can't legally carry that concealed weapon in that other state. And this bill would make it so that if you have a concealed carry license in one state, you can carry that concealed weapon in any state that allows concealed carry. Is that correct?
Absolutely. You described it perfectly. So the problem is that the NRA is pushing very strongly for this, and saying it in a very benign way, that it should be recognized like a driver's license. Of course, you've already passed a check to be able to conceal carry. Why should a state line stop you? And, that sounds fine, except it's not like a driver's license, because it is not the same standard state to state. So in Illinois, we have fairly strict standards about who can have a concealed carry permit, a FOID card, and you have to have live fire training, background checks, and all these different things. You carry a license, you carry a card with you. And so I have no problem with concealed carry in Illinois. I mean, that's fine. Like personally, that you've gone through the background checks, I assume that you are a responsible gun owner. So you both mentioned you're from Ohio. I'm from Missouri. And Missouri has, in the past few years, done everything they can to dismantle any sort of regulation about concealed carry. And recently, they've removed all requirements. Basically, there's no training, there's no additional background checks, there's no even physical permit that you carry. You don't even have a piece of paper that says, "Oh, I'm a concealed carry." You just have to be basically 19 years old, and you can carry your gun wherever you want. And so I don't want someone who has passed those standards in Missouri just coming on over here to Illinois carrying their weapon. Mm-hmm. And so one of the issues in here is in Illinois, when we talk to Illinois FOID card carriers, and they're saying, it's convenient for me to go from Illinois to another state and carry my weapon with me. This sounds good to me. because I know that I'm a responsible gun owner. And we're saying that's exactly it because you've passed the Illinois standards. You
Mm-hmm.
need to step outside of yourself and think about the person that you really don't know coming from another state or the states where it's basically a mail-in certificate. You can mail it in and they'll send you a permit and now you can carry your weapon. There's those types of things that are really scary, and that if we have concealed carry reciprocity, that means any state that has high standards has to recognize the lowest standards of the country, and that is very dangerous.
And terrifying.
Yes.
So it seems like there could be some sort of legal solution to that. So there, something like an international driver's license or something, So this could be a national, of course, we don't do anything nationally here, but, we could. So it could be some sort of like national concealed carry permit. So you had to meet whatever the highest level of standards was, So there could be a way to say, yes, you, Illinois gun owner who has a concealed carry permit, you can travel to Michigan, to Ohio, to wherever you're going to with your gun, as long as you have applied for and paid for. Hey, let's give the government some money here, and paid for your national federal concealed carry permit.
Us three sitting here talking about that sounds very logical. And I would support that if there was this high national standard. Last week, so this is December 3rd that we're talking about this. Last week, this particular bill, HR 38, was in markup committee. The room was flooded with Moms Demand Action members and survivors of gun violence, and they were sitting there and they were watching, and amendment after amendment where they said, okay, let's add this requirement. Let's add this requirement. Let's add this safety measure. Let's make sure people that have violent misdemeanors that they can't do this. And every single one was struck down by along party lines by the Republicans. So we sat there and we said, okay, if you're really going to push this through, can we add these amendments to improve accountability, to improve responsibility? And every single one was slashed down, just to the astonishment of everyone there. It's very clear that there's no compromise and there's no negotiation right now. So we are continuing the fight as strong as possible to stop concealed carry reciprocity.
There was also a picture that was shared on Twitter, and I'm not sure who originally shared it, but it might have been Shannon Watts who shared it originally, but it was kind of terrible. During that hearing that you're talking about, one of the representatives, presumably a Republican, threw an M&M across the room into the mouth of another Republican representative. And so these gun violence survivors are sitting in this room, this topic they care a lot about, they're asking for certain things, and these representatives are throwing candy at each other.
That is absolutely right. And most of them weren't even in the room for most of the time. They'd kind of casually walk in, and now they'd be on their phones. They're throwing candy around. They're not listening. They're not making eye contact with anyone there. And then they just all come in for those votes that say, nope, we're not going to do any amendments, no amendments, no amendments.
That's horrifying.
Shannon Watts had also posted that Lucy McBath, who's one of the mothers of the movement, and Richard Martinez, who lost a child to gun violence, were sitting in that committee hearing all day, that they were there from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And so these lawmakers were just sort of going in and out and, skipping around. But the people who cared about the issue were there the whole day.
Yeah. So what we're doing this week then, in response to all of this, is we are, of course, we always are about calling. So calling, making your calls. We call about so many issues, all of us. It's exhausting. And of course, the taxes are going on now, and net neutrality. So while you're on the call with your senator and your representative, please go ahead and mention that you also care about gun violence prevention and that concealed carry reciprocity should not be passed in this country. We've made a simple tool for Moms Demand Action. We have a text number, 64433. And if you text the word dangerous, that's our specific one related